back for another casual conversation with the classic, ladies and gentlemen. Today we got a very special guest, influencer, content creator, brand ambassador, my guy, Peter Chao. How are you doing today?
I'm good. What a fantastic intro. Thank you so much for having
You're
me.
welcome.
Big fan of the Wrestling Classic for sure. Been following your page for years. I'm just glad that there's a platform for me to sort of, I guess, enjoy, the love that I have or that have had for the professional wrestling since I was born, really. 6 years old. I was
Though I definitely wanted to get you on it because, like you said, you followed the page. You're a big wrestling fan. I always find it such a surprise when I know people online, whether they're YouTubers or influencers, or like athletes or whatever, but they're big wrestling fans. Like it blows my mind. Like people don't really get to see that side of them. So we're definitely gonna dive into that today about you being a wrestling fan. But first things first, I want people to know more about who Peter Chao is and what you're doing. Obviously, for those that are tuned in, watching me now, you can see that Daniel's here co-hosting with me. Daniel from the Dropkick Podcast. He's co-hosted a ton of these interviews with me as well. Daniel has been a big fan of yours for years.
This is insane. Like, as a
Thank
fan,
you so much, man.
Yeah, of course. Like, as a fan, like speaking to you, like I would have never thought this would be happening like 3 years ago, 2 years ago, or even a year ago. Because I think it was back in the day, those videos, those Chinese guy does this and that, like those popped off, man. But I wanted to ask, like, how did you come up with the character of Peter Chao and like the skits you came up with, the character? Like, what went into that?
Well, mostly it was just having discussions with my mom, watching Chinese commercials, I think. Well, sort of where it came from was there was this Toyota commercial that we were watching together, my mom and I, and we sort of just took the piss out of Chinese culture in general in terms of, the stereotypes and the Chinese accent itself. And there was this Chinese channel that my mom would subscribe to. And by the way, thank you so much for your kind words right out the gate. But,
Of course,
in terms of this commercial itself, was the entire thing was Cantonese from beginning to end. And then at the end, the salesperson or the spokesperson would say, Toyota, number one. And like, even though the guy's English was, subpar at best. And that's sort of where the inspiration for the accent sort of came from. My mom and I were like, hey, we were laughing for hours after that. Mm-hmm. So I was like, what if I created a character, that was just based around this? And at the time, YouTube was still very edgy, whereas now it's almost kind of like the PG era of WWE. It's like that back then was the Attitude Era, and now it's, sort of the PG era.
I think that's to be said about society. Like it's moved into that era right now for everything. Because even with my page, there was a point where I used to joke around. Like my page had like an attitude era where I'd post some things that I would never post today. That was part of my growth and why I popped off. But like I can't do that no more. So I totally understand. The thing that actually is mind blowing to me, right? Because I've watched your videos in the past. I've always known who you were, and I've definitely seen your videos. But then I was like, oh, wait, he follows me.
Yeah, I actually, you were one of those pages where I was like, for some reason, how sometimes when you follow a page and you, forget about, hey, there's an actual person running this.
Yeah.
And you don't think about that. You're just like, oh, someone's just reposting clips or reposting stuff that, I love and, that I grew up with. And I was like, I have to, I didn't know who Justin was.
Yeah,
I just associated with Wrestling Classic, and I was like, this dude loves wrestling as much as I do. And the thing is that, and I know that you were going to touch on it, but growing up, it was almost kind of like an embarrassment if you liked wrestling.
That was kind of the theory behind the page was I wanted to make a place where, because there was a point, and I want to say around that period, 2014 when I started my page, where being a wrestling fan wasn't cool anymore. You still watched wrestling, or you wouldn't see anybody out and about just wearing a CM Punk shirt or any modern day wrestling shirt. Probably, yes. Maybe they'll be repping the Undertaker or NWO and Stone Cold, and that's cool. That's cool, Ric Flair. But if you're repping a Roman Reigns shirt, oh, you still watch that? And it was this weird thing where I wanted wrestling fans to have a place on Instagram specifically to be no, let's reminisce. Let's talk about wrestling. Let's remember why we used to love it, why we still watch it. Let's get the old fans knowing about the new stuff and the younger fans knowing about stuff we grew up on. So the fact that you found it for almost that specific reason is pretty cool.
No, to touch base on
and
that.
By the way, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Daniel.
No, sorry about that. To touch base on that, I actually like the way I found out you liked wrestling was actually watching one of your old videos, and you're wearing like a Paul Heyman shirt, and you also you went to the same Raw that Justin did, the Slammy Award one in
2013 Slammies.
Classic,
you guys
championship ascension ceremony.
I saw that, yeah. And I'm like, that's so dope. He likes wrestling too, but it's amazing.
But the point I was trying to get to,
I'm the meme of the yes sign. I'm actually one of the people, like, you know, the one where the camera pans across the entire crowd, and that was like, I think that was the first Seattle show, and Brian Danielson talked about this in something. I can't remember in this interview, and he referenced the GIF that I was in because like me and like 4 other friends were like, hey, nobody's talking about this yes thing that he's been doing. Let's all make signs. And literally we were the only people with the yes signs, and we saw the camera crew, and people who have been to the tapings will know this, but like pay attention to the production people, because the directors or the producer were like pointing at us and going, hey, this should be the establishing shot of when the show starts. And you know, lo and behold, you know, I went back home, tuned into the show that we went to, and I was like, oh my God, it's us. And you feel this like euphoria, you know.
It's super cool when you get caught on TV, right? You got
so good, yeah.
Part of starting the yes movement, like that's pretty crazy.
I take credit for Brian Danielson's success. I've always said that to myself.
My point I was trying to get to is that I watched your videos. I realized you followed me. And it was only very recently that I realized your name actually isn't Peter Chao.
No, it's Chao. So you can see it on the thing.
Like I honestly want to say this, maybe it was a few months ago. I'm like, what? His name isn't Peter Chao?
Actually, I should ask Daniel this. Did you think that the character was a real person?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. You know what I thought? I thought like, so I used to like read stuff online. Like I was in that generation, like growing up. And like when you were like interviewing people on the streets, like talking in character. And like, I remember you did that Justin Bieber thing where like, you were like trying to give out free concert tickets and you're just going to random girls and stuff. And I'm like, is that really it? Because that's fucking hilarious.
That was my favorite stuff to do, was like actually incorporating the character within real life, like almost kind of like, you know, the guys on the street doing the interviews, except like in character. I always felt that it would be more interesting, but yeah, those were some fun times. I can't say that I would be able to do that now because I'd probably say the wrong thing, but it's probably you know, best left in the past, sort of similar to the Attitude Era, I guess.
No, for sure.
What made you kind of slow down on the whole YouTube situation? Because it seemed like you kind of started transitioning more towards acting and stuff like that instead midway through. Because you had some vlogs too, and you're doing some acting, you're doing some other stuff. But like, when did it be like you want to take a step back from the character when it worked more towards the acting and whatnot?
I kind of just didn't want to be known as one thing, and I was like, you know, I didn't want people to think that like this accent is all I could do, and that it was sort of that was my limitation in terms of being a performer. It wasn't even back then. I wasn't even acting yet, but I was like, if I can play this character that I literally created in my head, perhaps I could do something beyond this. So I was like, with the way that YouTube was progressing at the time as well, it was sort of getting more and more difficult, because maybe both of you can relate to this, but as soon as you start getting paid for something, it starts to become work.
100%.
And you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. You're like, I love doing it when there wasn't money. Like the first year and of YouTube was fantastic, because we were just kind of like, it was my friends and I just churning out idea after idea. And then when I started getting paid, it was more so like, not like you're on your own, but it was like something that I felt bad for sort of asking them for favors in terms of coming up with storylines, coming up with something. So, you know, that was sort of when I was like, hey, let's go beyond this and let's just try to try this acting thing out and doing commercials and stuff like
So what came first, the Peter Chao character in the YouTube channel, or the passion to wanting to act? Because was that something you realized?
Peter Chao came first.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Like, did you want to be like an actor, get into this like entertainment field when you were a kid, or was it like because this popped off, you're like, oh, I could do more? Because that's kind of my story. Like, I never thought I was going to be like I didn't know you could make money like by starting an Instagram page and then trying to do other things like interviews and writing for Gary Vee's web. Like I didn't think any of that was possible. It was just like I did this Instagram page because my ex-girlfriend didn't want me to have Instagram, so I made a wrestling page to connect with wrestling fans, and now here we are. So like when people ask me like, is this something you always want to do? I'm like, subconsciously though it was, because since I was a kid, I always wanted to do something with wrestling. So now this can kind of come into the topic of maybe like law of attraction and manifestation, because I've always wanted to. It's been in the back of my head. I would take marketing in school, like maybe I can work for the WWE. I take creative writing, maybe I can work for the WWE. And now I'm doing something with wrestling where one, I'm writing, one, I'm doing some broadcast journalism stuff. I almost took broadcast journalism at BCIT. I'm like, all these things that I thought I wanted to do to work in wrestling, I just started doing, and it involves wrestling. So like, what was your journey?
Isn't that great how that works though? Like manifestation is key, because like I feel like whether it was Peter Chao or whether it was anything else, I think it leads to the right place. Yeah. I think eventually, because I went to like school for the opposite. I went to school for directing, and then when I was a kid, my dad, bought me like this cheap little video camera. It took a lot of convincing because Asian parents don't really like to spend money on anything. But I was able to.
It's always the maybe next time, and there's never a next time.
There's never a next time, exactly. So, he bought me this little camera, and we would make wrestling videos at home. Like, I don't know if you ever did that, but like, growing up with your brother, it's really easy just to like put on matches. We never got a ring, so we just like would slam each other on the bed. Like, I can't even count the amount of beds that we broken. Like, in terms of like the spring, everything, just body slamming, FUs, attitude adjustments, whatever you want to call it. Fantastic. Just what a life.
So I remember you just kind of said it though. Like you technically always had this like creative side of you. Like you got the video camera, you were recording stuff, you took directing. Like there was this side of you that was there. It just eventually started playing out in different ways.
Yeah, it's true. And here's the thing is that you don't know what you're going to become, especially like, that age-old question is like, what do you want to be when you grow up? You don't really know when you're that young, but you start to figure things out as you evolve as a person.
I understand why people ask teenagers that, or people that get right out of high school, like, what do you want to be in that? Because, like, we got asked it all the time, especially from an Asian family, like, when relatives come over, that's like, what are you taking to school? What do you want to be? Like, that's like they're up until you hit 25, then that's when you're going to get married. But, now I look back and I'm like, if anyone asked me that when I was 18 years old, I'm like, I probably would have made something up or said like a broadcast journalist or something. And I'm like, but like, you don't really ever know. I feel like you don't know. Like it just, because I know people that got degrees and they're not even doing stuff with the degree they got. Like they got it, it's great, but it's like they went a whole different direction. They all of a sudden they're like real estate or investments or something completely different. So it's like,
I guess somehow I think you and I, like all of us knew, because wrestling is performance. And lame enough, I was like, my dad was a big wrestling fan, and I didn't know this. Like even at 6, my dad watched wrestling all the time. We're going back to NWA, Mid Atlantic, like when it was actually.
Oh wow! Okay, so you're like a wrestling fan. Like, people just don't
big
know.
Time. I'm not a casual. I'm not a casual guy. I'm casual now, unfortunately, but my OG
you're on
stuff,
casual conversations right now, but
oh, there we go. Yeah. No, but lame enough, I was more of a fan for some reason when I was 6. I was more of a fan of bowling, and so bowling actually came on after WWF Superstars, and so my dad would be watching WWF Superstars in his little man cave basement. I don't even know if man caves existed at that time. Anyway, he was watching WWF Superstars, and I'd be like, is it time for bowling? So I'd go downstairs, and I'd catch the last, 5 minutes. And this so happened that the last 5 minutes of this particular show, they were rerunning the Ultimate Warrior promo, one of Ultimate Warrior's promos. And I was just like, I fell in love with the entire showmanship and performance of professional wrestling, and I was like, I'm hooked. And then ever since then, I started watching with my dad like every Saturday. He never took me to live events, even though there was a main event of Ric Flair versus Macho Man where I grew up, and I grew up in a small town like Fredericton, New Brunswick, all the way east coast in Canada. And they headlined, and I was like, 20 years later, I'm still like, you're a dick for not taking me there.
No, fair enough. What were like your earliest memories of wrestling? Who were your favorites when you first started watching?
It was definitely the Warrior, for sure.
Okay.
The colorful, the color, the just the way that he would bolt to the ring, the fact that he had like I still to this day love tassels. If I see any sort of article of clothing anywhere with tassels, I'm buying that shit. Because it's just the way that he like shook the ropes, everything would just be going. I was more a Warrior guy than I was a Hogan guy. And opposite to that, I would guess I love Macho Man because he also had very colorful attire. That's missing nowadays. You don't see that.
I was more of a Macho Man guy than a Hogan guy too, but it was because the colorfulness, the voice, the presentation of him. I'm like, this guy's weird, and I don't know about me, but like I always gravitated to like the weird people, like Macho Man, Undertaker, like the Warrior. And then as I got a little bit older, I started like just because like Bret was Canadian, I became a Bret guy, and Sean would dance funny.
Love Bret.
Sean, you know what I mean? But so you watched wrestling, and you would obviously like play wrestle with your brothers and stuff, and break mattresses and film that. And
sure. Yeah.
Did you guys go into character when you guys are doing these things? Was that like you would play? Did you ever come up with your own wrestling personality?
Yeah, man, we did actually. We like held our own pay-per-views where we were every single character, and then we would actually have like the outfit where we would actually create tassels. And you know, my brother was actually really good at the arts and crafts thing, so he could actually make, like, you know, I guess if cosplay existed back then, like little mini costumes of just our favorite wrestlers, and we would be them. And then I ended up being like almost kind of the general manager of the fake organization where we like make up characters, make up our own names, make up our characters, and have like narratives, like actual A to B plot through lines of where their character would start and where they would end up, and you know, and all of it would just take place in our living room. So
that's insane.
Good shit.
That's crazy. Now, speaking of characters, back to the Peter Chao stuff. When did you want to like just, I guess, like reveal who you really were? Because I remember you did a video, I think it was a couple of years ago, and you talked about like, you know, taking off the sunglasses, showing your real eyes, and your real voice. Like, when did that really hit you? I guess to really reveal.
I guess it was. Well, I mean, you mentioned earlier, you know, when I was like doing those like street interviews and stuff, like it was a time in which a lot of people would actually recognize you, especially I live in Vancouver. A lot of people would come up to me and ask for like photos and stuff, especially in places with, you know, a dense Asian population. A lot of Chinese people would live there. Like in Vancouver, there's a place called Richmond where a lot of people will like find like the best Chinese food. They would recognize me there, and I would actually have to bring a pair of sunglasses with me, and then every time they recognized me without sunglasses, I'd throw them on, do the Chinese accent, it was almost kind of like the Undertaker protecting his identity back in the day, like not breaking kayfabe, even with fans coming up to you. So I was like just sick of just bringing the sunglasses with me everywhere I went and turning on the accent. I was just like, I was hoping that people would be more receptive to the real me, but at the time they weren't. Like even in 2015, they were still loving the character to a certain extent, bring back the old stuff, kind of like the way that, you know, fans would criticize WWE, bring back the Attitude Era is sort of where I'm at now. It's like the real me was never good enough, and that's sort of where everything's sort of kind of going a different direction. I was like, oh, this is the time to move on officially from this character. Is that I've done everything that I can do with it. And now it's almost like when Taker, you know, turned into Biker Taker. He was like, let's just change shit up. Because Biker Taker is more close to who Mark Calloway is.
100%.
Right? So it's like he wanted to be that because he wanted to be more authentic. And I guess I can draw parallels to
that. Since you've like dropped the character, like you still are referring to yourself as Peter Chao. Do people expect what they were getting before, or like?
Not really. I've actually tried to contact Instagram to get them to change my name to like my real name, but it's just it's not happening. And I think it has something to do with the fact that you know, it was the character when I started Instagram, so it gets really, really messy, especially when, you know, if I do book a gig acting and I have to tell them my real name is Davin Tong and I'm not Peter Chao, it just gets into this whole thing where it is relatively confusing. I don't even know where I came up with the name Peter Chao. It's just like fun to say, like in the accent, like Peter Chao, like it would just kind of like rang off, you know. It just sounded good.
Yeah, that's insane. But I wanted to ask, so looking everything back at now, you know, 10 years later or whatever, if you could do things differently with the character, with everything you've done with the Peter Chao character, what would you do differently, or would you just let everything be how it is?
No, I think I would have. I would have tried to make the character a little bit more mainstream. At a certain point in terms of making an episodic series, and then also doing like a cartoon earlier. Because a lot of what Peter Chao does is very cartoonish, things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get away with in real life or saying to real people. And I think if that was the case, I think it would have been a very successful like cartoon on Adult Swim or Comedy Central, or like almost kind of be like a South Park.
Yeah.
So, while I don't look back on it with any regrets, it's more so like, hey, it just wasn't, YouTube wasn't advanced enough for the mainstream people to really recognize that, hey, this is a serious platform. Like
Especially
back in the
at that
day,
time.
it was
Yeah.
exactly, it's of the time. Creators were actually being boosted by YouTube, whereas now you go on the explore page of a YouTube, of YouTube's landing page, it's all like Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Late Night, Mainstream, Variety, GQ Magazine. It's all these major brands that are finally recognizing YouTube as a serious platform. Whereas back in the day, it was like me, Ryan Higa, Kev Jumba, like all these like OG guys.
Yeah.
And it's not the same. And I'm not, looking back on it, oh, it should have been like this or it should have been like. I think things are the way they are for whatever reason. But yeah, I would have tried to, really infuse what maybe the mainstream outside of the YouTube fans that I had building up, and make it a little different, so that the mainstream people could be like, oh, okay, this guy does have comedic timing or talent or what have you. And they would have considered me for opportunities before. Whereas the shift was so abrupt that I pretty much had to start from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do people still want Peter Chao, the character, to come back?
I think they want it as much as people want the Attitude Era back.
Because I'm like, you know how crazy it would be if Peter Chao, the character, showed up to a local wrestling event.
Well, actually, you know what? I funnily enough, I did do a stint in indie wrestling in Vancouver.
You do a couple banner, right?
Wrestling. Yeah, it was called ECCW.
Oh, you did something with ECCW? Okay.
Yeah.
I did. I linked up with them for, and I played a heel, and then I was the self-proclaimed women's champion. You can't do that nowadays. But I would show up, and it was almost kind of like I wanted to do or pay tribute to Andy Kaufman.
Yeah.
So during all the women's matches, I would come in, cut a promo during the women's match, and say like super offensive things, like nobody wants to see you wrestle. You should go back to the kitchen, like just stuff like that, like really really offensive stuff. And then, I can't remember exactly all the plot threads, but I ended up beating one of the women to become the self-proclaimed women's champion. And I would come out and cut promos week after week. And then finally it was me and their top female wrestler, and I got speared out of my pants and pinned with 1, 2, 3.
I need to see this. I have a really good relationship with ECW. I'm cool with all of them. They're like Scotty guys and Nicole Matthews and all of them. I need to see this.
Yeah, it was Nicole Matthews, actually, yes.
She's the one that beat you. That makes sense. I was Nicole. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, she broke one of my shades. She was like, I wore a cheap pair of shades, and I was like, you should snap this. And
she killed Peter. She's the one that ended Peter Chao, guys. It was Nicole Matthews. She broke the shades, the infamous shades.
Broke the shades, man. She destroyed my career.
That was the beginning of the end. That happened in the ring. It all makes sense now.
But I gotta say though, like doing it, like obviously watching wrestling and then being a fan is one thing. But when you go out there, even with the crowd, like in the Commodore Ball where we got like 1,200 people there, you're in the middle of the ring, the spotlight's on you, you're cutting a promo, you get a sense of what it's like to be a performer. To really truly, and I respected wrestlers all the way. Like when I was a kid, I was like, oh, it must be so amazing to be in the middle of the ring and just put on a show for all thousands and thousands of people watching this and millions at home. And you start to really appreciate it as an art, and it is. That's exactly what wrestling is. Everything I see, like everything in my life, I can attest to wrestling. So,
well, that's what I was gonna say too. That's why I brought up the fact that you and your brother used to come up with characters and play different roles, because I think that also played into your confidence of creating a character like Peter Chao, because you've basically been doing this since you were a child. I'm telling you, all the things connect when you don't realize, and you look back, you're like, oh crap, the dots all do connect. I was now curious to ask you, like, obviously a lot of your videos that you created for YouTube and content, even the content you still create for Reels and stuff on Instagram, like, those are planned out. You write a script. It's it's you. It's a camera, maybe a couple of production people or whatnot, or people that you're working with. Like you've had some major productions, like the Gangnam Style music videos and stuff, where it's like
I remember
a
that.
lot of people involved with them, right? But then at the same time, it's like, how did it feel like to be so comfortable doing that? And now you're in ECCW playing a role in front of a live crowd. Like that's a different atmosphere.
it's so different. Like, I guess in the sense that, like, why I think wrestlers actually turn into really good actors, because they're already used to turning it all the way up to 10. And now when they arrive on set, they almost have to dial it back 50%. You look at the John Cena. I mean, I watched a couple episodes of Peacemaker. He's really coming into his own as an actor. Dave Bautista, one of the great, I would say, wrestler turned actors. And Dwayne Johnson, obviously one of the highest paid and most successful actor in the world. Where does he come from? His roots, professional wrestling. I think people are starting to sort of respect the art of professional wrestling. I think Roman Reigns is next. I think when his body gives out, he's going to be a massive performer on that circuit. But I guess to answer your questions, I almost kind of did the opposite. It was like doing stuff on set or working with a production team is much easier than performing live,
because you have to react to the crowd.
Yeah, it's that instantaneous reaction, that energy, and I can now understand why when The Rock says he misses it, and the element that he misses that can't be mirrored on set is walking out in front of those thousands and thousands of people, millions at home, and just feeling that energy. There's nothing like that. And even if it's 12,000 or 1,200 of that, what I experienced, it is a feeling, and it feels good. Whether they're booing you, whether they're cheering you, they're making noise, and I think that's the key.
Because usually, I think when you're on a set or you're recording your own skits or whatever, like it's basically how you reacted, how you feel about it when you're watching it back, or how it felt in the moment. But like you're getting an instant response when you're in front of a crowd of people of whether this is working or not working, or like how like. And I feel like it's just a different atmosphere, and I think like. I don't know. I just always found like it's always cool when I see someone go from that way to the other way. Like I feel like when people go from the live crowd to the peacefulness of acting, in a sense, it's like more okay, manageable, how to tone it down. I guess we're just doing this over and over again until it feels right. Where you have to figure out if it feels right on the spot in front of a live crowd. Like there's no retake, reshoot. Like that's it. Like.
Yeah, it's not like when Sid was like, I think it was like an interview where Jim Ross was interviewing Sid, and he was like, let me take this from the top, and then Jim Ross is like, "It's live, pal."
Well, let me ask you this then: like, you're obviously a hardcore wrestling fan. You've been watching for a very long time. You talked about Mid Atlantic and stuff like that with your dad watching that. You've talked about the early '90s and the Attitude Era stuff. Was there ever a point for you personally where you fell out of wrestling, where you just kind of weren't about it, or like? Because I always say for myself, it was like my late high school years. Pro PG years when it was like 2007 or 2011ish, really pro Cena years. I'm not the biggest Cena fan. I respect the hell out of him. I'm not a Cena fan. I think he got better as the years went on, and the less he was the main guy, I appreciated it. But
I respect Cena more now than I did when it was his.
I just feel he wasn't for me, and I had to realize that like the time when he was on top, it wasn't the product wasn't even catered towards me. It was catered towards children. And I was still trying to grasp onto something that I enjoyed watching my entire life, and it just wasn't for me. But was there a point for you where you were just like, I think
I would say a similar time. I would say the John Cena era, 2013, I would say to 2017 was where I could casually scrub through the shows.
Yeah.
And this has lasted to this day where it's no longer must see for me.
Yeah.
Especially in a live environment. I don't have to tune in right there. I'm not at like Monday Night Wars, Raw is War, all of those times when it was Angle, Edge, Austin, you had the ECW versus W. Like even during that time, I was still hooked, like really, really hooked. But now it's like I don't feel like I have to watch it live. I can watch even the Royal Rumble. I feel like I could watch on delay. Like,
do you feel like it's a matter of the product, or is this a matter of the way things have just changed with technology and just like the internet? Like, you can literally not watch, but you can go on Instagram and see what happened like 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I can complain about it, but there's just too much of it. It's like too much of a thing. Whereas like back in the day, it was more so, okay, it's 2 hours, and that's it.
Yeah,
Like,
no,
that's
100%. I relate to that because it was like you'd watch on Mondays, and then sooner than later it came Thursdays. The SmackDowns on Thursdays when we were kids, and that was it. Like, that was it. And especially when WCW went out of business, like, that was literally it. And it was kind of easy to watch that stuff. And I also feel like when you're younger, you want more wrestling. You want to watch as much as you can get. So you'll watch like the other minor shows like Velocity and Heat, or like After Burn, or whatever it was called, where they did recaps. But like, there is a lot of wrestling today. Do you watch AEW at all?
Yeah.
Have you checked out AEW?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm able to watch more AEW in its entirety than WWE at this point.
Okay.
I care more about the characters in AEW than I do the WWE. The WWE, I'll tune in to watch Lesnar and Reigns and RK Bro, and that's it.
Yeah.
And some of the women's stuff, and then that's it. I like Bianca, and that's it. Yeah, I don't feel connected with anybody, and I can't really explain why. And I have to say, like, back even when I tuned out of wrestling, one sort of thing that actually made me stick with it was enjoying the smiles that I saw on kids in the front row in their Cena garb, and like cheering their heads off. And like, to me, I was like, oh wow, this actually, like, kids love this stuff. And you start to be like, oh, I wish that I could feel like that again. Like, it's that.
Just, the business has been too exposed to us, and once again, like the internet and just what we know, it does take away from. And that's when I had to start looking at it from a different perspective. Like, oh, I need to watch this as if like I'm a kid still. Like, I need to not try to ruin things for myself, not read dirt sheets, not read the rumors, just like enjoy this show, because that was what it was growing up, was just trying to enjoy this show. I think people
can you do that though?
I can. I think I try real hard to. I loved the reason I picked Instagram at the beginning was because nobody really reported news on Instagram like they do now. There wasn't like news Instagram pages. It was just like pictures and role play accounts and like just fun stuff, memes and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, an editor is like, nobody was actually like breaking news. Like, that's on there now. It's happened in the last like 2-3 years now. There's like reporters on Instagram and stuff too, but I hated Twitter because Twitter was really negative. Everyone was always bashing everything. Everyone had an opinion. Facebook became for old people by that point. And it became antiquated. But like, I tried, man. I still try. Like, I'll still like get pumped about something, and someone will be in my comment section and be like, "That's so predictable." Like, Meltzer reported it like a week ago, and I'm like, "Yeah, well, I don't read Meltzer's reports because I'm not trying to ruin this stuff for myself." I also
think that people put certain people on pedestals. It's like, why care about one person?
I hated when people would come into my comment section and be like, Dave Meltzer says it was a 5-star match. I'm like, well, that's his opinion.
That's exactly what it is.
His opinion doesn't hold any weight. If someone does something for a long enough time, does that just mean it means more when they say something because they've done it for a long period of time? Or does that just mean they just keep doing it? If I'm the Wrestling Classic for another 10 years, will people just take anything I say seriously because I was the Wrestling Classic for like 20 years? Like, is that the goal here? It's just keep doing this. So like, by some point, there will be a group of kids who will be like, no, he's been around for a long time. He said it was a great match, so it's a great match. Is that what happens? Longevity.
You're gonna be the new Meltzer, man. They're gonna be like Wrestling Classic that this was 6 stars.
Does longevity create like validity? Like, I don't understand.
It creates respect. The longer you're doing something, the longer it becomes ingrained with people. You know that, like, oh, this person's opinion matters, and that's the person I'm gonna go to. Whereas I just like watching as a fan. I like sitting there watching the show and going, hey, this is what I feel. This connects with me. This doesn't connect with me. But, as soon as people start to form their opinions that are 100% reliant on what someone else has said, that's really when the issue starts to kind of.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what I had to do. Like, especially those years I didn't watch because I really didn't like John Cena. I didn't like what was going on. Like, they moved SmackDown to Fridays, and I was in high school going out on Fridays, and this was the VCR era. This wasn't DVR, PVR. Get highlights on YouTube right after. So like, I I think I used to look at it as that hardcore fan that used to read the websites and read the spoilers and just ruin it for myself. And when I came back to watching it after the Punk pipe bomb and it sucked me back in, I was like,
yeah,
I don't want to know things. And when I started doing the wrestling classic thing, I really didn't want to know things. So I was like, oh, this is more fun when I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, no, I feel that because, and back in the VCR era, it was great because going back to the cheap Asian parents thing, is my parents didn't have cable, never got cable, never subscribed to any of like the Raw and TNT. I never got those channels. So I had this friend, Chris Fitzpatrick, and he would tape every single episode of Raw for me, and I'd have to watch it the day after. But the thing is that I would miss the discussions that would happen at school about what Austin did the night before.
Yeah.
So on Tuesday after school, I'd go home and watch the episode, and I'd have to pretty much go through the plug in my ears.
There was something very like, I'm just getting very nostalgic and reminiscent of like walking down your block, meeting your buddy to get his tape to watch wrestling. Like, oh my god, he has Survivor Series 2002. Oh, I'm gonna go grab it from him. And like, you're like, if you're gonna come grab this from me, let me borrow your WrestleMania X8. I'm like, okay, sure. Like, you walk to your buddy's house, you knock at his door, you're swapping tapes. You look at the cover in the back, you're reading the like, oh, look at the graphics, look at this, and like,
dude, I used to actually go to Blockbuster and beg my dad to like rent old Royal Rumble tapes or old WrestleMania tapes or whatever tapes there were. I'd be like, oh man, the design on this is like so amazing. It's colorful. It's got all these wrestlers on it. And they're all like just cartoon versions of like Hulk Hogan and Macho Man. And like, it was just not to be like so reminiscent that like the old times were better. But I feel like we're steering in that direction. But like, yeah, I went to Blockbuster. They would only order like 1 or 2 copies of the pay-per-view.
There's something about having a tangible like a cassette or a set. Like I even with my DVD collection when I was unpacking it in this house, I'm like I could just sell these, but I'm like, there's still something about it. Like I like opening in the flaps had all these cool designs, and I remember when you get like a new DVD, you want to pull out the thing and see what was on it. You had a little legend, little thingy, and like. I'm like, it's not the same like going on the network, picking it and just throwing it on and going. It's just it doesn't have the same. I still go to like Best Buys and Walmarts and stuff, and I'll go in like the movie section just to find the wrestling DVDs and be like, oh, look at the case, like just look at the design of the artwork of how they put this together. Like that's missing these days. It's kind of a bummer,
dude. Now it's all the network or it's like everything's on
the American.
I don't even. I have yet to meet someone who has Peacock. Like it's described.
That's crazy.
Like,
yeah. Oh, at least 4 wrestling. I don't know.
Oh yeah, at least 4 wrestling. No, that's
who are some of your favorites in AEW then? Because you've been watching AEW, so like, who are some of your favorites? Look, who's standing out over there for you? Because I'm a big character storyline guy. That's what I grew up on. Like, I love wrestling as much as the next person. Sounds redundant now that I say this all the time, almost on every show. But like, I love wrestling as much as the next person. But I'm a character storyline guy. And I will always say that I think WWE provides a lot more in the entertainment aspect of things, where AEW is really wrestling based. They have some good characters. They have some good stories. It's usually the old school WWE guys that have a better time telling better stories, the Punks, the Bryans, the Jerichos, but sometimes it comes off a lot of very wrestling. Like there's a Beach Break show today and I'm looking at the card and I'm like, oh, these are matches I want to see, but I don't know like how invested I am in those matches because there hasn't really been like storylines or characters that really get me that invested. So I also feel like you're the same way. You like storylines. You like big characters.
I do like storylines, but I also love a good wrestling match, man. I mean, I like that everyone is hating on Cody Rhodes. That's funny to me.
Yeah.
I love that. And the fact that, like, he's trying to break the fourth wall in his promos, it's almost too pandering to what wrestling is.
Well, I think people start hating on him because he panders too much, and then he says things that in his head he thinks, like, makes me sound like a great guy, but it's like, no, you're starting to sound like a douchebag.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't sound like the same way as I can't even draw a comparison, but it's just, I mean, it's sad to say, but the people that I enjoy the most in AEW used to be in the WWE. So I do really enjoy Bryan Danielson. I love the prospect of seeing a Jon Moxley versus Bryan Danielson match, but under the AEW umbrella. Like, I'm more excited to watch that than I would have been watching Dean Ambrose versus Daniel Bryan from WWE. And I don't know why that is. I think it's just the way that it's presented. After seeing those 1 hour, like, matches that go to draw. Like that reminds me of the NWA days. Like,
and that being said,
yeah,
like I don't think there's been a bad Bryan Danielson match in AEW. Like he hasn't. Like, and I agree with you because like on his way out, like when he was in there, he's like he came out of retirement in 2018, and if I think of Bryan Danielson's run from 2018 to like 2021 or 20, yeah, when he left 2021, I'm like, yeah, there's some memorable matches, but then he just had a bunch of matches like I don't even like they just kind of happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I'm like almost every match in AEW, he could wrestle John Silver, and I'm like, oh, he gave John Silver like a good match. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
there's something.
And like, you like it more when they like it more. Like when I watch a Bryan Danielson match now, I'm like, he's having fun. He's having a good time. He's going out there, and the match isn't laid out beforehand in terms of all the beats. He's having fun putting on a show, performing, doing what he loves. And when you see that, you start to like what you see more. And I think that WWE is so overly produced and overly scripted that, like, even now, my favorite iteration of Brock Lesnar is now. Like his last 8
he's having
years,
a blast.
Dude, he's coming up with these burns just like this. It's like him saying to Corey Graves the other night on Raw, where he was like, "You want me to get naked for you, Graves?" or something like that. I was like, just random stuff that he just said.
It feels authentic. It feels authentic, and it feels like it's coming from Brock. It doesn't feel like someone told him to say these things. And obviously, Brock's in the position where Brock can go out and do whatever Brock wants to do.
Yeah.
And now that he's allowed
to tell Brock what to say.
Yeah, who's going to tell Brock, like, you can't say that or don't say this, or why'd you say that? Like, even if Vince yells at him for a second, low-key Vince knows that's his cash cow. So it's like, and I've seen it with like even Orton with Riddle. Like when guys are having fun doing what they're doing, and when guys are just going through the motions. And you're right, like with Bryan and AEW. What I think that's the thing with AEW a lot is that regardless how you feel about the storylines or the characters, if it's too much wrestling, everybody for the most part feels like they're having fun.
Yeah, I think I made a comment on one of your posts, and I said that AEW is all around a better show because it feels like everybody matters.
Yeah.
Whereas WWE has that deal where it's like, okay, here are the top guys, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas AEW is like, I like to see what's going on with, Jurassic Express. I like to see what's going on with Darby Allin and Sting. If I had one sort of critical thing to say about AEW is that there are just so many multi-man matches because they try to force everybody onto the show.
Yeah.
And so it's just week after week is just like 6 versus 6, and like. It gets to be
that bothers me a little bit, and just the lack of continuity sometimes.
Yeah,
just stories and like people. I do sometimes think there's matches that are on the show just for the sake of having matches, and I'm just like, well, can you give me a reason why I'm supposed to care about this match that you're just giving me? But that's me. A lot of people are like, no, I love it. I'm like, well, maybe I like having a reason. I don't know, but the other thing I was gonna say when it comes in terms of what you were just saying is I was on this show with narcolepsy guy on TikTok. He's pretty big on TikTok. I went on a prediction show, and we talked about what you just said, where we were trying to predict who's going to win the Rumble this Sunday. I think this might drop after the Rumble, but go check that out. But and he was saying like, oh, like what if like Reigns or Brock loses or something, or Reigns loses and they go in the Rumble and they win it. I'm like, the problem with that is that what they're doing then is just making everything about Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, where they could give that Rumble win to someone else, like a Lashley, like a Big E, like a Kevin Owens or something. Yeah. The other people still feel like they matter, because I'm on the same ship as you sometimes when people are like, so what do you like in WWE? And I'm like, what's the can't miss for you? I'm like, well, the Brock Roman stuff is always intriguing. Roman's been intriguing all year long. Anything Roman's doing has been intriguing to me.
Oh, man, Roman has been the best he's ever been, and that's a good idea. I like that idea of actually having, because ever since Big E lost, nobody has talked about him. He hasn't, had
the reign didn't hit as they expected to. It was not a good reign.
No, it was not a good reign, but I think that he's a good enough performer for them to still have him in that upper echelon where 100%. He's kind of always chasing or like always in contention for it. Sort of like kind of like where Rollins is now. Like if he wins the Rumble, I feel like that could give him more credibility, because he didn't really, you're right, have that luster as champion. Very similar to Kofi. And who knows? King Woods is fun though. I like King Woods.
Well, Kofi and E was them winning the belt was a big deal. It's just everything that happened after. Like actually, Kofi's reign was even better than Big E's, to be honest. I enjoyed the Randy feud and stuff. Like I just I don't know, but my point was like, yeah, like even like you said, like when it comes to WWE, like the things I was looking forward to the most was the Roman stuff, and then now Brock, and then the women, because I think the women's division in WWE is just subpar. Like they're all their women in that division have characters, have personalities. When they come out, you know exactly who they are. Even if they have like a 3-minute match, like you know who they are. Like you know that Zelina's a queen and Bianca's this and Mela's that and Sasha's that and Charlotte's gonna carry herself like the biggest star on the planet. Like they can't, they feel like stars. But yeah, it's just the lack of, you know, there's not other people that are like, that doesn't seem like a lot matters.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a show that matters.
Mm-hmm.
It's important, I think, I think Daniel, you mentioned continuity. Like it's important for everything to make sense week to week. And I know that there's a challenge within that because literally when they say they're the longest running, or when WWE says they're the longest running weekly episodic television program for the last whatever how many weeks, it's tough. It's challenging. It's just that I feel that sometimes when I find out who's writing for these shows, where are they from? They don't know anything about wrestling. They're TV writers. They're people coming up from Hollywood and infusing what they think they know about wrestling instead of getting people that actually know it. Because I feel that they rely on these writers so that they could sort of relate to what mainstream people are watching.
Yeah, and it doesn't always work
the same way.
No. Were you an NXT guy? Did you like NXT?
Old NXT, not NXT 2.0.
That was my question. So how do you feel? How do you feel about 2.0?
I think everybody recognizes that it's a failure.
2.0 is 2.0 does really like. This is the thing that people outside of like the being super colorful and all that, like what it is really reminds me of what NXT was at the very, very big, like 2012, 2013, where like everyone was introducing new characters and getting themselves over, like Sasha, like Bayley, like the characters that came out of that very early inception of NXT. Like like Bo Dallas and Neville, like those like characters up until when 2015, when they started bringing in the Kevin Owenses and the Sami Zayns and the Finn Balor's, then it started really becoming this different NXT where it's like the wrestling brand, and eventually I felt like it became the independent wrestling company of the WWE, and now they've just reverted back to that. No, we just want to build characters here and bring them to the main roster. We're not trying to build a whole third brand.
The way that I see it is NXT 2.0 feels like Saturday Morning Slam.
It does.
It just it's just like it doesn't feel important. Whereas you're right, all of the main stars right now on the main roster can be attributed to their success in NXT. You know, Rollins, Owens, like all those guys. Yes, I totally agree. That's the system that works, and it's proven to work. And I think in recent years, it's proven that it's almost like a lot of people don't even want to move from the NXT roster to the main roster because they're in fear that Vince doesn't know how to handle that. And I think that was proven true.
We saw a lot of people come to the main roster not be used the same or not carry that same credibility they had in NXT on the main roster. But then also we had a lot of people that just was staying in NXT forever. And the whole purpose of NXT was go down there, build a name for yourself, come to the main roster. But then you guys had like Gargano and the guys that were just there for like, I mean, the Undisputed Era was on NXT from 2017 to 2021. Like people don't, they look at, because that's, and I think that's where the problems started happening because they went through the idea of let's try to make it a third brand. Then they did the whole Wednesday Night War thing. They could never really beat AEW. And I think that might have been like the light that Vince saw. Like, why? Like, I thought this was supposed to be some great third brand. Why isn't what? And I think that's what happened. Like, that's what I genuinely
They should have never done the Wednesday Night War. What a bad idea. Like,
I think whatever reason, nobody ever talks about them. Like, that's what did it, I think.
It's just like it was unnecessary competition to give Vince the idea that it was a failure.
Yeah.
If it stood on its own and like Vince stayed out of it, and the only reason why Vince is involved now is because he saw that it failed against AEW. You know, if it continued to stand on its own, it would have been totally fine. We would have continued to see a consistent, steady flow of stars being moved to the main roster and being used in a meaningful way. Whereas, you know, you get people that were presented in a specific way on NXT, and then they would do simultaneous appearances on the main roster, and they would appear to be completely different. Or who's that guy? And this actually proves my point. Who's that guy that lost to Jeff Hardy in like 2 minutes?
Karrion Kross.
Yeah, Karrion Kross. There you go. What a presentation on NXT. The entrance, the manager that managed him to the ring. Yeah, all of that. And then when he got to the main roster, it was just like, ugh.
You know, 100%. What was one of your like favorite storylines growing up then? Like when you were watching wrestling back in the day? Like what was the thing that you're like, this is everything?
Oh, the build-up of Warrior and Hogan. I know everybody says this, but the build-up to WrestleMania 6 is just unrivaled. I miss the days. I hate things. I miss the days where stuff happened that led to something. Like there was a conclusion as to where it would end up months before they would have plans. They're like, okay, so the final two people in the Royal Rumble is going to be Warrior and Hogan, and that's going to lead to WrestleMania 6. I mean, that's the type of storytelling that I feel that is missing.
Now let me ask you this, okay? Peter Chao, okay? He's Bobby Heenan, okay? He's gonna have his own family. Who are the 5 people you're putting on your Survivor Series team? Who's the Peter Chao family?
It's tough because the Heenan family was just so big, right? And and I feel like I would represent all the 5 people that I feel don't eat it. You know what I mean? Can it be both AEW or WWE?
Let's do it 2 ways, okay? Let's do it with like legends. Let's do it with old school wrestlers you grew up watching. 5 guys that you would manage and you would be in their corner. And then you can do a modern one, which can be a mix of WWE and AEW.
You know, nobody says this, but I would certainly pick Tito Santana.
Oh wow!
I would manage Tito Santana. Horrible on the mic, fun in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
That's one person. The Mountie.
Yeah.
Nobody says the Mountie. That would be fantastic.
I'm just visualizing this team already. We got Tito Santana and Mountie side by side. Okay, keep going.
Absolutely. I would also manage Mr. Perfect.
Okay, there we go.
The Rougeau brothers. And then I would also, the tough one. From the Attitude Era, I would have picked Droz.
Who?
Droz, right?
You
DROZ.
You just outside of Mr. Perfect, you just picked, like, don't be wrong, the Rougeau brothers are great, Tito Santana's tremendous, the Mountie is great. You just picked the most random group of misfits.
I want to pick the people that I knew that nobody else, if you asked them the same question, would have picked, and I guarantee you, not one person would have picked Droz.
Could you imagine Peter Chao in the corner of Droz cutting promos for him? Puke now!
I picked all the people literally that can't cut promos.
That's
like
true.
Actually, if AEW, I would pick Bryan Danielson because I feel like he's a fantastic wrestler, but I really need to see more reason to get invested into his matches, and maybe that's coming. Maybe it's a slow burn to that. Whereas CM Punk, I'm actually more excited to see him talk than wrestle. Kind of an opposite.
Well, sometimes when you put a talker with a talker, it works. As Punk and Paul Heyman's partnership, they could both talk all for themselves, but them together was just even better.
Yeah, it's just 2 different animals. The WWE and AEW. Everybody feels important. You got Moxley just in there, just going off he's just crazy. He's wild. You don't know if any of the things that he says is approved beforehand or anything. It just feels more raw and more authentic. And it feels like, again, AEW as an entire package feels like it's more must-see than anything else that WWE is producing at this time.
So now, lastly, I just want to ask you to wrap things up. With everything you've done, whether it was the Peter Chao era on YouTube or the content creating and acting you're still doing today, any advice you want to give to anybody that's kind of discouraged to go out there and just put themselves out there like that? Because the biggest thing I always found is like you put yourself out there, and it looks a lot easier than actually doing it. And I think people sometimes are like, oh, I could do that. Oh, that's hilarious. But it's like, no, it's a lot of work. And
it's
a lot of
performing in general is a lot of work. And I think those street interviews was a really good test because you have to approach them. You have to say, sometimes I would just go up to them and start interviewing and then ask them if I can use the footage after. I think that was the key. Yeah. Because if you sort of, give them any sort of reason to say no, then it might not happen. But if you just go up, interview, done, get all the bits, you're key. But I think that, the advice that I would have for anybody looking to get out there, you just have to force yourself to do it. And if you don't do it, you don't know what's going to happen otherwise, because you have to be, cliche, comfortable with the uncomfortable. You have to go out there. Like, you have to do, like, I did stand up. I did the ECCW. I tried to infuse the character in as many forums as I possibly could, you know, when the character was hot. And I think that that's the only way to see whether something will succeed. And you're bound to fail, but you have to learn from that. And that sort of informs what the future is. So just do it.
It's wild. Is there anything else you want to add? Is there anything you want to plug before we wrap this up?
I'm good, man. I just want to talk about wrestling. I'm just
now that you've been on here, you'll definitely. Now that you've been on here, if you're ever free, like I'm more than happy to have you come on the TWC show where we just recap the week of wrestling. We can talk about how you felt about this week's AEW and the Rumble. Maybe if we do a Royal Rumble recap show, you can hop on there too. But I just wanted people to get to know Peter Chao, Davin, whatever you want them to know you as moving forward. I wanted to get to know you. I wanted to get to know your story. I wanted them to know like your background because and also the fact that you are a big wrestling fan. Like it's not just like, I think sometimes I've come to a point with my page specifically where sometimes I've had like people follow my page just because they've gone to know me personally. Like I met them and they're like models or actors or whatever, but they're not really wrestling fans. But the fact that like you're genuinely a wrestling fan, I wanted people to know that because there are really cool people that follow me that are genuinely wrestling fans, and you're one of them.
I just love wrestling. There's just nothing not to love about it. I mean, everything that I've learned in life can be, again, attributed to wrestling. Whatever job that you have in that, let's just say, for example, you work in, corporate culture.
Yeah.
There's faces, there's heels, there's politics, there's people that people favor for certain reasons. It's all wrestling. Storylines, narratives, everything. I feel like life is
watching it so young that you actually learn a lot about life at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
You're learning a lot of stories and whatnot. What would be your dream job if you got to do something in wrestling?
Oh, I would have during the height of Peter Chao, if you asked me things that I would have done differently, I would have probably applied to be a wrestler when I was young, when my body could take it. Like I would have been I would have loved to do something where I would, similar to what I did in ECCW, like pick on the women, or pick on, let's just say, I would love to be a manager as well. I think in the WWE, I think I would have done well there in terms of cut promos and just get, take a beating, take a fall, take a powder. That would have been fun. But yeah, I just want to thank, both of you for having me on. I think I love talking about wrestling. I don't get enough of an opportunity to speak about it because who am I going to talk to about it?
Well, that was the thing, man. I'm telling you, once you got a little bit older, like all your friends stopped watching it. UFC came out. It just became like a thing that was, I used to watch it when I was a kid, but that's I made this page and I found a community of people that still watch to this day. And it's like, I made so many cool friends from around the world, from all the traveling to WrestleManias and stuff. And it's like, oh, you're the wrestling classic. And here we are. Look at that. Listen, I'm telling you right now, you're going to come on the other show too. Like it's inevitable.
Oh yeah. I mean, at this point, I already consider myself invited. Yeah. To speak about the UFC thing for a second, I don't understand why some people can't like both.
Mm-hmm.
Just like both.
Some people don't look at wrestling for what it is. Like I think it goes back to Peter. When did you find out that wrestling wasn't real?
Oh, wow. I would say 2002.
Some people couldn't get over that pain. Some people just couldn't let it go. They held on to that pain. They cried. They're like, this has all been a lie. Stone Cold is not that guy. And I think that's all it was. And then UFC came on, brooding men actually beating up each other. And that's like, you have to get to a point because that's like the major, that's the turning point is when you find out that it's a scripted television program and the finish is predetermined. It's from that point, do you continue watching or do you stop watching?
Yeah,
I think I was one of the people that continued watching because I stopped looking at it as a competitive sport, and I'm like, oh, this is a television show. And that's why I have a hard time when some people get really frustrated about the wrestling matches or winning and losing and well, this should have been I'm like, guys, it's none of it's real. No matter how many championships someone won, all of it. But once you start watching it like a television show, there's less to be upset about. People will get mad about used to watch wrestling, but they will go into a movie theater and watch Avengers Endgame and suspend their disbelief and get lost in that world for that 2.5 hours. And that's okay and cool. But if you do that every week for about like whatever, there's like 19 hours of wrestling a week these days, then there's something wrong with you. But like,
there's nothing wrong. It's just a different art. It's live theater, except they're wearing barely nothing. It's entertainment. That's what it's about. If you're entertained by it, then by all means, love it, like it.
Silly that it's hard not to not. It's so silly that's hard not to like once you like figure it out. You're like, I got more enamored about the magic behind it once I realized it wasn't.
Me too.
I'm like,
Beyond the Mat. I'm like 1998.
What are you saying?
1998. Beyond the Mat documentary. That's
Well,
then you start realizing, right? Like that's what happened to me. Is like, so I'm like, all these times I was playing like these SmackDown games or playing with my action figures, and I was booking or like playing with my cousins and my friends in the cult second were putting on wrestling matches, and we were calling it on the grass like, hey, you come hit me now, I'm gonna come at you. Like we were doing wrestling. Like I've been doing this since I was a kid. Like,
dude, you gotta call the audible, man. You gotta do it. You gotta whisper in the ear and you gotta say, yo, I'm coming in with the clothesline.
We were doing that since we were kids, but not realizing that's what they were doing too.
I have family dinners to this day. I'm 34. My brother just turned 40. Like, we're pretty much closing in on being middle-aged. We still have wrestling matches every single week when we meet our family. And he has kids now, and we're just wrestling. Sometimes we'll even tell the kids to go away and go, hey, yo, like, we're having a match.
This is adult. This is adult time. We have a match to go on here.
Like, get out, go have your own wrestling match. Go over there. Me and your dad have business that needs to be settled.
It almost keeps you youthful. It's like, if you ever wanted to be Peter Pan, just keep watching wrestling, because go become a professional wrestler. You'll never have to grow up. Like think of most of the wrestlers that are in there today. Like, they'll be like, I've been a wrestler. Like, you couldn't say this maybe 10, 20 years ago, but most of the wrestlers that are in both companies today grew up as fans. Will be like, I've been watching this. Unless you're like the rare, I came from the NFL, I'm Brock Lesnar, and I didn't really watch that much. 90% of them grew up as fans since they're little kids, beating up their Power Ranger toys or their stuffed animals, dropping elbows on pillows, or fighting their siblings. Like, most of them are just like us. So it's crazy that, like, if you want to be a kid forever, just go be a professional wrestler. Like, what I mean? Like,
live out your dreams, man. That's just the way to be. Like, it doesn't matter what we do for a living. You could be like an accountant, a manager, whatever boring ass corporate job that you could think of. If you get to have a family dinner every week and your brother happens to be there, or your younger sister or your older brother, just fight them and call an audible. That's all I could say. It's just that is what art is. And
I mean, that's like prolific. That's like part of life.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you gotta call an audible. And you
gotta call an audible. Sometimes you gotta call an audible on your own life.
That's what I'm saying. It's like a life lesson right there. Sometimes you gotta call it on the go. Like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know where I'm going, but
sometimes actually I'm very proud.
I think I'm gonna turn babyface the next year.
You know what I like to do is I like to infuse wrestling terminology in everyday conversations in which the people I'm talking to.
Oh, I can't tell you how many times I've even said to like a girl, like, I popped, and I'm like, she probably thinks I popped a boner.
Yeah, and that's not what we mean at all. It's like, oh, you popped.
Like, that's when we popped. She's like, what? I'm like, oh, like, fuck. Or like, I was trying to pop the boy. It's like, it's just, then she's like, what I'm talking about. What do you mean pop?
Yeah, it doesn't sound right, does it?
No. Like, what? Like, I'm trying to think of other ones. Like, what are other ones I know I've used? Heel and face for sure.
Sometimes I'll be like, I'll say to my wife, it's like, I'm gonna get heat for that. Like, or don't. I noticed that you didn't break kayfabe.
I've got a lot of heat with this person before, and people are like, "What?" Does that mean?
Yeah.
Like,
heat is probably the one that I use.
Like, I don't understand. Like, no, not that type of heat. Like,
yeah. Or I just gotta take a powder. That
Yeah,
sounds
I've never used that one, but maybe I would. That's a good one. I was like, girl, instead of saying like I don't smoke or anything, but instead of saying like a smoke break, I'd be like, oh, you go for a powder.
That's actually how I end meetings. Like I gotta take a powder. See ya.
I've used the term, but that's I guess it's not technically just wrestling. It's like amateur wrestling and UFC and stuff too. But I've definitely said I tap out a lot.
Oh yeah,
no, I tap out. I'm out. Like I feel like
I think that's pretty obvious. I mean, if you say I tap out, I think even if you don't watch the UFC or you don't watch WWE, I think you know what the other person means. Whereas breaking kayfabe and take like and I have heat with someone, maybe not as universally sort of. It needs context.
Yeah. Well, it was a pleasure having you on. You'll definitely have you on the TWC show. Guys, everyone go follow Peter Chao on Instagram. It's Peter Chao. Are you on TikTok? Are you on the TikTokers?
Yeah, I just actually crossed 1 million followers on TikTok. I'm very happy about that.
Oh, wow.
But it's not the type of thing you can. Thank you, man.
When are we going to collaborate on the TikTok?
Oh, you want to have a match? Let's do it, man.
I'm game. We'll wrestle.
You know, sometimes I feel like, oh man, like all the things that I think will go viral don't go viral, and all the ones that I don't think will go viral. I remember I did one where in the park where I gave my brother a Stone Cold Stunner, and it was like synced up with JR going, he hit him with a stunner, like, and that nobody watched it, and I was just so sad. Just like I was like, oh, I put so much effort into syncing the stunner with the actual stunner itself, the sound. I put all this effort in.
Send it to me. Let me post it.
Oh yeah, I should. I should just send all my wrestling related videos to you, and you can.
Listen, this could probably be off the air, guys. We're gonna wrap this up, but you send that to me right now. I'll post it right now.
Oh, fantastic! I will.
And I'll be like, Peter Chao coming on the show. This is him.
Man, thank you both, man. It's such a pleasure to speak with you, and just like talking with a couple buddies about pro wrestling.
That's what this is supposed to be, casual conversations.
Casual conversations.
Casual conversations.
Oh.
Yeah, with the classic. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, guys, and make sure you guys check out Peter Chao on TikTok, on Instagram. Google him, watch a bunch of stuff will come up. Go check out his YouTube channel, check out his old videos. There's a ton of gold down there. Daniel's been a fan forever. One night we just stayed up watching a whole bunch of your videos because like, you haven't seen this, you haven't seen that. I'm like, no, I'm like, let's go. Let's rock and roll. It's not just Peter Chao videos. But
what a waste of time.
This guy's calling out Vancouver Canucks fans. We're like, those are the most depressed fans ever, and you're trying to rub
my god, the Vancouver Canucks, that video actually, now that I think about it, oh man, that's one of my favorite videos.
I mean, I've lived here my entire life. I was born here. Do you know how depressing it is being a Vancouver Canucks fan?
Let me just break kayfabe for 1 second. That video, I don't watch hockey. I had no facts about the Canucks.
That's crazy.
I literally don't know anything about hockey. I had this other person that was a big hockey fan just feed me lines to say to people to piss them off, and that's how the video came about, because like I didn't know who at the time Roberto Luongo. I didn't whoever the fuck, and I was like they would be giving me all these.
That makes it even funnier to me now. But guys,
yeah.
Go check it out. I'll link all the stuff below in the description area. His YouTube, his TikTok, his Instagram, everything. And keep doing the thing. We'll see you all next time. Ooh, yeah. Dig it, I'm a macho fan.
Time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.